Amen. Well, good morning to all of you, and it's good to see so many of you. Did you not get the memo? It's fall break. You're supposed to be at the beach or on a cruise, but anyway, no, you didn't. But I am so glad you're here this morning. And prayers for all those who are traveling, because lots of folks on the road and getting a bit of a break with their children, a well-deserved rest before the big push toward Christmas. And I don't know about you, but I feel that need. Boy, I could take a break. I bet you could too, from all the news that has been so heavy upon us in this last week and a half. And I don't know about you, but I've almost been obsessed by it. I have been obsessed by it. I own it. When I was on vacation, I was out of the state, and I have to say, I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I did was, can I get some news of what's going on in East Tennessee and North Carolina? And you may have done that too. So I watched all the videos, everything I could get my hands on, just over and over. Maybe it's because, if you're like me, and I think many of you are, because these are our neighbors. It is Upper East Tennessee. It's part of us. And we have so many connections with North Carolina and those mountains. Many of you have homes there, friends there. And many of you have close connections there. I know that Matt Turner, his sister, lived at Black Mountain. Susan Weatherford's family has property and family at Black Mountain. Those kind of connections, when I talk to you all and hear the stories, they become very compelling because they are real and they are not in black and white. They are in color. Those pictures and videos and the images are just overwhelming, aren't they? They're almost unimaginable. They're almost surreal. And yet I'm still determined not to try to dwell on them, so I'm pushing that away, not doing it. And I advocate that you do it as well. See them. Be educated by them. That's important. But there is one that does stick out with me, that is etched in me and probably will stay with me for a very long time. It was a very short news report. The reporters had finally gotten into Asheville. It was a day and a half after the water started rising and people lost so much. And this woman was standing over in that old Biltmore area and obviously standing in front of where her business had once existed. And there was nothing there except a pile of lumber. And so she's standing there looking at it, trying to dress against the damp and the cool air. And I think that the reporter off camera said something like this, "Well, how is this for you?" And she didn't look at the camera. The camera was here. She looked straight ahead, and she was looking at the pile of rubble, and she said, "Well, I've lost my home, I've lost my business, and I've lost my job." And then she did just like that and stared straight into the camera and did not say another word. Says it all, doesn't it? What words are there to describe the pain, the volatile nature of the loss, death, but also just all the other loss that goes with what we're seeing? But you know, in the face of all that, when we don't know what to say, have some hope. I'm a positivist. I think these experiences show us the exact opposite of what we often believe about the world and are being told about our society. We are responding. We do have words. In fact, better than words, we have actions. People are helping, and they're helping in amazing ways. And it would be kind of vitriolic for me to stand up here and talk about that. I'm here with you. I'm not over in the middle of that. But there are people in the middle of that. And there are people here taking and delivering things for their immediate necessity. I mean, they don't have water. They don't have food. Your sister was out food and water, literally. We're talking at risk, and there are people doing that work. And my guess is that we will see stories that we just unparalleled of service and sacrifice over these next weeks. You know it'll be true. It's no different than any other disaster, any other big emergency. But I want to take us a little bit away from that. Not too far. Step back just a minute with me. You know, 3 weeks ago, I started looking at this passage from Hebrews and the Gospel of Mark, and I have to tell you, I thought, oh boy, what do I do with that? And then about 10 days ago, I thought, oh boy, that's exactly what we need to hear on that Sunday morning. Let me read a portion of Hebrews again. God has spoken to us by his Son. He, the Son, is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. It was fitting that God should make this pioneer of salvation, another word is sanctification, perfect through suffering. That he should make this pioneer perfect through suffering. 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 You know what I hear all the time? It is a magnificent God we worship. A mighty God we worship. Okay. You know, when I was a young person, I could point out a few. In college, Vietnam was raging. Things were falling apart. My brother was in Vietnam. Those words were hollow. And I'll be honest with you, they're hollow still to me today. I get the point. I don't get the point. All right, so God is magnificent. In the face of where we're all journeying most of the time, if you're in one of those journey places with that S word, suffering, those words aren't really helpful, and I can prove it. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying they're not helpful. And they're not wrong. But what do we do? I hear so little said from the pulpits about suffering. So little that I suffer because I hear so little, to be honest with you. And now that I'm out on the high dive board, I might as well just go double down and jump off the end of the board. And what are you going to do? Fire me? Give me a break. You know, the conclusion of the church for so much of its time since about the 11th century, and its heresy, I think, for generations, is this black and white thinking that suffering is only about Jesus' death on a cross. It just is. Many of you were raised with that. That's the beginning of the end of the statement. The only way you can go back to suffering is go to the cross. You know, there's a lot of suffering that is not about physical death, guys. In fact, all of it is mostly not about physical death. It's about living this life. And I want to say quickly, I am not an adherent that life is suffering. No, and no, it is not. But life has suffering in it. It is a reality. And one that I'm thankful that in communities like St. John's and thousands across the United States, we will walk that journey with each other now, tomorrow, and next week. Because we're not afraid of the reality, as were, by the way, the people who wrote the book of Hebrews. Do you know that word comes up over and over again in Hebrews? See, they were struggling with it. They were trying to understand it through their experience. How do we understand suffering? Emotional, psychological, pain, all the stuff, loss. I'm not trying to dwell on it. In fact, I'd like you to not think about it. And yet it's real. It's right in our face. It's been in our face for 10 days. You see, Hebrews took it as good news, not bad news. That this deal of the pioneer perfected this sanctification, this holiness in us in generations to come would be through suffering. Through suffering. They were convinced. They believed ultimately. They believed that that was what was in Jesus. The hard parts of suffering, because he was human. Not faking humanity, he was human. Anybody can fake anything. Do you think the gospel is a fake? No, you're here. I don't either. The suffering is real. Jesus' suffering was real. His struggle with his humanity was just like yours and just like mine. We just don't want to say it because it's messy and way hard to unwind, which I'm not going to do with you unless you offer lunch right now. We'll stay, but it will take, we'll be here till 3, I'm telling you. And life is more than suffering, isn't it? It's a component. So let's put it in perspective. But you know what? We do respond, don't we? I remember years ago when Paul and Carrie took one of our first mission efforts down to that terrible hurricane in the Gulf. It had been some time since it had happened, but they went with the young adults from here to go help, to do what they could. It wasn't a lot, but to do what they could. And you know what they did was just show up. So Paul shows up to this house at Gulfport. Almost everything's gone. There are a few houses standing. The houses are gone. In fact, most of the driveways were gone in this neighborhood. And they show up, and there's a man mucking out his house, just worn out. You can tell, exhausted. And they walk up, and he looks up and said, well, hey. And they said, hey, we're here to help. And he went, okay. He said, who are y'all? And said, well, the Episcopal Church is doing relief along with other groups. And we came down, and he said, well, what are you doing? And Paul basically said, well, these 10 kids, these young adults and me, you got us all day. How about the next 10 hours? He was leaning on a shovel. He started weeping. You don't have to have all the answers. It's not a big deal. It's the small stuff that matters. That's what we forget. When we can enter into another person's suffering at lots of different levels, it absolutely changes the economy really quickly for that person and for the person doing the entering. It's proven again and again and again. Happened yesterday. We had a memorial for one of our parishioners who died, and many of you showed up. It is a choice, by the way, to show up, to come, as we say in the South, to pay our respects. Many of you did. And I want you to know 17 members of this choir showed up. They always show up. They sing at every burial. Every burial, they are here. The Daughters of the King did hospitality. So afterwards, people would have a place to rest with each other, just to pour out their hearts, not hurry away. Have a little, just a place to sit, to rest with each other. They showed up. That's what we do willingly. We learn to show up for other persons. And see, I think our willingness to do that at whatever level then starts us and keeps us on a journey. It starts us and keeps us on a journey that's important. And if you're as old as me or as young as the youngest person here, it matters not. We're all on that journey forever till we take our last breath. And that journey is the willingness to turn our hearts a bit toward other people. Maybe like the Bible said, this heart of stone that John Ross lives with, this heart of indifference that I can so easily put out, becomes a heart of flesh, a heart of spirit. That's what our turning to suffering produces in us. And then it produces much fruit, doesn't it? You see, I don't care if you're at the tip of the spear and you've actually over there mucking houses right now with people and trying to pull all that stuff apart, or you are at the tip of your pen about to write a check so that they will get the supplies and the food that they need. Whatever you are doing, you see, it shows that you care about another person's suffering, and it starts us down that journey. Care may actually lead us to compassion. Just might. Where we actually might enter into the life of another person and begin to experience what's happening from their point of view. By the way, regardless of what that is. That we begin to actually have an insight into the others around us other than this kind of practiced American indifference where we walk on by. Or worse, we have a projection about what they ought to or should be or could be doing and should have done. We are really good at that right now. And then we might understand a little bit better. We might tolerate a little better. We might love a little better. And you know what? Then we start again. Then I learned to care better. I learned to care more deeply. And it just keeps going. I've been at this 69 years. I'm like many of you, I don't remember the first 4 or 5, maybe since 5. So 64 years. That seems to be the journey of coming to places like this, worshiping and practicing and living together. See, I don't think the question is, how can I afford to give? I think if you want to take this seriously, meaning so it will help you in some way other than you checked off the box, I went to church, how about this? How can I not afford to give myself to others? Because it is in entering other people's suffering. And it doesn't have to be a big S. It might be a little tiny thing. That's what makes you human. That's what makes me human. And by the way, that bluntly makes you a Christian. So why don't we follow God's model? Do you see what God did? God became human. I don't understand it. So that we might become more human to one another. And when we do, and when we are, it was like the choir showing up yesterday. It's all I could think about. And it changes lives. Amen.